morning everyone, I am Aldrin Nipolito, serving you the hottest and latest news of today's different social issues.
Philippines suffers worst job losses in 15 years due to COVID-19 and lockdown. About 4.5 million Filipinos have lost their job this year, with the unemployment rate at 10.4%, the highest in 15 years. The government reported due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown, shattering thousands of businesses. But as a quarantine restriction gradually eased and the economy reopened to allow workers to return to their jobs, the jobless rate also eased to 8.7%. The Philippines imposed the Enhanced Community Quarantine or the ECQ in areas with high COVID-19 cases from mid-March to May, which stopped 75% of the economy. Acting Socio-Economic Planning Secretary Carl Kendrick Chua, who heads the State Planning Agency National Economic and Development Authority or DNEDA, state that as a string of 4 typhoons plus the onset of a projected prolonged wet season had inflicted significant employment loss in agriculture. In the latter half of October, the country was hit by typhoons. Typhoon Nika of Fuel Pepito in Quinta, which contributed to the reduction of agriculture and employment by 1.1 million or about 70% of the 1.5 million jobs lost between July and October. In the Philippine Parliament, Representative Joey Salceda said that the latest unemployment figures should signal the urgent need for one final round of stimulus measurement of the Bayanihan Rate.
Philippines lags lowest unemployment rate since pandemic. The Philippine Statistics Authority or the PSA reported Tuesday that July 2021's unemployment rate declined from 7.7% in June 2021. In a joint statement of Socio-Economic Planning Secretary Carl Kendrick Chua, Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez III, and Budget and Management Officer in charge Tina Rose Marie Canda, the rate of jobless individuals in Metro Manila dropped significantly from 14.4% in April 2021 to 9% in July this year. Majority of those who left the labor force cited concerns around COVID-19 or the coronavirus disease 2019 as the reason for not working at this time, the economic manager said.
Workers face unemployment and military's influence in democratic space during COVID-19. The pandemic has greatly affected the health, jobs, and rights of the people. The labor force survey of the government as of February 2021 indicates that the unemployment rate is at 8.8%, which is equivalent to 4 million people. The highest unemployment rate was registered at 17.6% in April 2020 during the first implementation of ECQ.
Duterte blasts human rights critics, touts anti-terror law at UN. President Rodrigo Duterte took a dig at critics of his administration's campaign against illegal drugs, criminality, and terrorism, whom he said have passed themselves off as human rights advocates to discredit the government. In a recorded speech aired before the high-level general debate of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Duterte also highlighted the Philippines anti-terrorism law, which was passed as the country was battling the pandemic. The new law has earned local and international backlash as it could be used as a tool to prosecute political opponents. Since this was the first time since he became president 4 years ago that the tough-talking Duterte took part in the gathering of the world's leader done virtually due to COVID-19 restrictions. Duterte said that the Philippines remains committed in the fight against terrorism, bringing to fore the enactment of the 2020 Anti-Terrorism Act, which he said will provide for an effective legal framework in stamping out the menace. Duterte also told the international body that his administration remains committed to protect human rights against the scourge of criminality and illegal drugs. He said his administration will continue to take part in an open dialogue and constructive engagement with the United Nations. The Duterte administration has been widely criticized for its campaign against illegal drugs, which has killed thousands of suspected drug peddlers, in which many of them are poor. Human rights groups in the Philippines and abroad have condemned the killings connected with the so-called war on drugs. According to them, the human rights situation in the Philippines has undergone a dramatic decline since President Rodrigo Duterte assumed office in 2016.
The Philippine human rights situation is dire with the number of extrajudicial killings, illegal arrests, and attacks against activists and critics unparalleled since the fall of the Marcos dictatorship in 1986. This made worse by Duterte's government indicate and materialized response.
Filipino human rights head who clashed with Duterte dies of COVID. The chairman of the Philippines Commission on Human Rights, who frequently clashed with President Rodrigo Duterte over the deadly war on drugs, has died over the contracting of the COVID-19 virus. We have lost a human rights champion. He was not just a fellow public servant, he was also a good friend, added Risa Hontiveros. Gascon was appointed in 2015 and his task is to look into all human rights violations, as well as abuses of. Because of his role in investigating cases of human rights violation, he was frequently a target of Duterte's verbal attacks. Gascon was deflected the name-calling and hurtful language, telling ABS-CBN News that he hopes the president might choose to withdraw them in order to have a common civic space. On Thursday, human rights lawyers group, activists and journalists mourned to the death of Gascon.
Philippine gay groups Islam homophobic Catholic College. A Catholic college in Iloilo in the Philippines' Western Visayas region has come under fire over its enrollment and recruitment policy that prohibits homosexuality among students and staff. College Iloilo campus site in its employment contract and enrollment forms a provision in its handbooks saying homosexuality is immoral and a ground for expulsion of students and the firing of staff. More than 80 LGBTQ groups have released a statement saying the college's stance come to the country's anti-discrimination laws. The groups also said they had heard stories of discrimination against people with diverse sexual orientations coming from Assumption College students. The conformity or enrollment contract is now proof of the standing policy of the institution on homosexuality. A hypocritical to propose measures on immorality in an institution while bluntly disallowing the existence of persons of diverse to GSC and denying their right to education, the statement said.
Paalas calls for respect for LGBT rights after discrimination versus trans women. Malacanang reiterated Thursday the need to respect gay rights in the wake of the detention of transgender woman Gretchen Custodio Diaz for using female restroom at Quezon City Mall. Presidential spokesperson Salvador Panelo said barring Diaz from using the women's restroom is a violation as he noted the need to respect members of LGBT community. Diaz was barred by a janitress from using the women's comfort room at the mall on Tuesday and was detained after the mall's management filed an unjust vexation complaint against her. She was later released and in turn filed a complaint against the shopping mall for violating the city ordinance referring to Quezon City's 2014 Anti-Discrimination Ordinance. Following her release, Diaz thanked everyone for supporting her.
The Philippines always believed in gender equality. According to the Philippines, a country study written by Ronald E. Dolan, gender equality was never questioned. even before the pre-Spanish colonial rule in the country. During the Spanish colonial, women became the treasurer of the family. From the same source, it also stated that both education and literacy levels in 1990 were higher for women than for men. The high position of the women is never unusual in the Philippines. Government seats, editor-in-chief, business corporation heads, all of which are positioned wherein women been in the country. In the 1986, the country elected first female president Corazon Aquino, a champion of the country's democracy, even for service-oriented such as assembly-type work employment opportunities, women flock on the workplace.
Philippine River Warriors fight tide of trash for cleaner future. Each morning, a group of Filipinos rake up piles of trash on the banks of one of the world's most polluted rivers, filling sacks in an endless pursuit to clean a waterway that is also a major source of ocean plastics. These river warriors are a decade-old group of about 100 people who work to clear the glut of garbage floating or wash up along Manila's notorious Pasig River. The warriors wear rubber boots and elbow-length gloves, using rakes and handmade tools to scoop rubbish from stagnant waters in different locations. The warriors started off as volunteers but now receive a basic income from a local government and operate in small groups at different parts of the river. According to Joan Lagunda, Assistant Secretary at the Environment Department, authorities were coordinating with local government to establish proper waste segregation practices and want informal settlers on the riverbanks to be moved. And according to Marian Ledesma, a campaigner with Greenpeace Philippines, the government should reduce single-use plastics and strengthen law enforcement on waste disposal and sewage.
Water pollution in the Philippines. The Philippines, or the Republic of the Philippines, is a country comprised of 7,107 islands in Southeast Asia in the Western Pacific. The country is surrounded by water: the Luzon Strait, the South China Sea, the Sulu Sea, the Celebes Sea, and the Philippine Sea. According to the United Nations, uncontrolled, rapid population growth has contributed to extreme poverty, environmental degradation, and pollution in the Philippines. Water pollution is a major problem in the Philippines. According to Water Environment Partnership in Asia, or what we call WEPA, 32% of the Philippines' landmass, approximately 96,000 square kilometers, is used for the agriculture. The primary crops are palay or rice, corn, sugarcane, fruit, root crops, vegetables, and trees for rubber. Increased population, urbanization, agriculture, and industrialization have all reduced the quality of water in the Philippines. The water pollution in the Philippines is mostly wastewater from the following sources. First, the industrial. The mental varies according to industry: lead, mercury, chromium, cadmium, and cyanide. Second, agricultural. Organic. Decayed plants, dead animals, livestock manure, soil runoff, and non-organic. Pesticide and fertilizers. The third one is domestic sewage. Contains pathogens that threaten human health and life. The fourth, other sources: oil, mine or chemical spills, and illegal dumping in or near water. One of the most alarming things Greenpeace reports is that out of the Philippines' 421 rivers, as many as 50 are considered dead and unable to support any but the most robust life. Greenpeace has been working to develop a solution to water pollution in the Philippines. The organization supports the clean production context in which the public has right to know which toxins they are exposed to in their daily lives. That's all. Thank you.
Did you know that scientific evidence has shown that the air within homes and other buildings can be more seriously polluted than outdoor air? It may seem unlikely as outdoor air pollution is pretty visible in large and industrial cities like those in the metro. But seeing as people spend the majority of the day indoors, the health risks may be greater due to prolonged exposure to poor indoor air quality. With the health crisis forcing the population to spend more time indoors, they need to be aware that indoor air pollution is a real thing and it possesses tangible risks that may be fatal. According to experts, here are some reasons why indoor air quality is critical for everyone's health. A country like the Philippines, with year-round high temperatures and humidity levels, is more susceptible to high concentrations of pollutants. The World Health Organization mentioned that 9 out of 10 people breathe air containing high levels of pollution, and indoor air pollution is linked 1 in every 9 deaths worldwide.
Philippine Foreign Secretary Theodore Locsin Jr. said, "The world is nowhere near ending the scourge of racism," citing the continued abuse of Filipino migrants, workers, and Asians overseas. Filipino migrants and immigrants have themselves been victims, subjected to rising physical and verbal abuse simply because of their ethnicity. In many countries too, migrants have suffered from disparities in access to economic and health services, including vaccines, perhaps in the hope that the virus will do the work for them, Locsin said. Filipinos living in New York said they felt unsafe amid the risk of verbal and physical attacks they face on a daily basis. Locsin then reminded all countries that the DDPA and the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination provide concrete steps that can be taken to allow nations to overcome the worst of our impulses.
Filipino teen reportedly punched called racial slurs in U.S. basketball tournament. An Asian American teen basketball player reportedly became a victim of racist attacks after he was called racial slurs and punched during a game held in Auckland. Prior to the incident, his parents narrated in a separate report by CBS SF Bay Area that Evan and some of his teammates who were also of Asian heritage were called anti-Asian slurs. Another parent who witnessed the incident also said the organizers did not even view the video at first. Evan's parents are also planning to file a complaint with the Auckland police regarding the incident.
Philippines asks Singapore to probe racist blog. The Philippines has asked Singapore authorities to take action against a blog author who suggested Singaporeans should show Filipinos on the street and be rude to Filipino workers, the latest sign of growing intolerance toward migrant workers in the wealthy city-state. The blog titled Filipino Infestation in Singapore, 5-point guide to showing displeasure without breaking the law, was posted at the end of May and has been taken down. It was written anonymously and was widely shared on social media, prompting the Philippine Embassy in Singapore to appeal the government for prompt action. The incident came in the wake of rising tension involving the growing number of migrant workers who have largely built the country's impressive skyline, transport infrastructure, and other facilities. About a quarter of the country's 5.4 million people are transient workers, compared to a tenth in 1990 according to government statistics.